It was the week of Pro Tour, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring except a Kasai, like a Betsy, and a Riptide, apparently. So let's take a look at a couple of the sleeper decks that picked up some wins over the past few weeks as we move into Pro Tour. With that on the mind, could we see them pop up at Pro Tour and do some things? Let's discuss. And before we go too far, if you would like to follow along with the lists in question, check the link in the description. I'll put them all there. And if you'd like to build your own versions of this and you need the singles, check out MinMax Games, because MinMax Games loves Flesh and Blood. They love you. They really do. And they love me as well, and they love this channel, and they want to support this channel, and they want to support you in buying singles. So check them out, because they're good people. Link in the description as well. So let's kick things off with Yasha Worth's Battle Hardened Keel winner deck list here. This, by the way, you can find, I put it together via the links or the deck list that was listed on FabTCG's main webpage. But this is an interesting version of Kasai, because this version of Kasai is a Hatchet's Kasai. I actually tested Hatchet Kasai a little bit after I lost a couple of games to Dromai from the Kasai side, and it felt real bad. And Hatchet Kasai felt kind of fun. The interesting thing about Hatchet Kasai is it allows you to splash Cleave in, and that was the main driving force behind wanting to play Hatchets. You can play just about everything else, and you don't have to give up that much. Instead, you have to give up Slice and Dice, which actually made me mess around with the deck a lot more, because there are some things that open up. And you also have to give up, what's a Run Through, which is the yellow Go Again attack reaction. But in those places, you can run things like Hit and Run, which are in the deck. Yellow Hit and Runs and blue Hit and Runs are included as well. They both apply to your next weapon attack, and not just, like a sword or dagger attack as well, which means that they work for Hatchets. And why are Hatchets cool? Besides the fact that you can play Cleave and deal with dragons, you can also play Spill Blood and, just like push dominated damage. Well, they actually buff themselves. So Hatchet of Body will buff Hatchet of Mind, and vice versa. The first one will attack for its base, and the second one will see that the first one attacked and get a little bit stronger as you go. As far as attack reactions are concerned, the non-buff attack reactions, the Go Again attack reactions, we have 9 here, and that is, I believe, no, we have 1 Shift the Tide of Battle, and technically the glints count as well. And what that ends up meaning for us is, if we're counting our total sources of Go Again, and that is very important to do with Kasai, we have 3, 6, 9, 12 as spoils counts. Technically 15, because that counts as well. 18, 21, 22, 24, 3, 24, 25. So we have 25 total sources of Go Again, which is sweet. That feels really good for Kasai. If you're building Kasai, look for around that like 23 to 26 range. Is what I've been sort of kicking around in my own lists that I've been building in paper and playing extensively. Buffs, the buffs from this perspective only look like Blade Flurry and In the Swing. In order to carve out room for, like these Spill Bloods and these Cleaves, we had to cut like Iron Song Response, if you're playing Iron Song Response, or the one that draws you a card and then puts it back on top of the deck from Reprise, which I'm for some reason blanking on the name of. Leave a comment down below, because for some reason while I'm recording this, I literally can't remember the name of the card. Stroke Foresight. There it is. Stroke of Foresight finally got to me eventually. You've got the standard fare of Nourishing Emptiness. You got your standard fare of, well, actually, technically, I shouldn't say your standard fare. I am running Iron Song Determinations. I think this card's really cool into a lot of different heroes. And the cool thing about Kasai and the kind of balancing point is finding really good yellows. And this, to me, is a really good yellow. And so I have 1, and then I kind of teeter back between 1 and 2 in the list myself. I'm a big fan of this. A card I have cut completely is Raise an Army, because I've found that I don't really need it into most matchups. And it didn't feel like it did anything for me into the Dragon Lady, and that was a matchup that was terrifying. And so I cut it for other types of things. A card that I'm coming on to lately is Push Forward as a blue. I'm going to start testing around with that and checking that out as well. And then Overpower is also pretty cool, but that's like a pretty big standard. I have Heart of Fandel in my list, by the way. If you're curious, I like Heart in the list. But this looks like a pretty straight up and down list overall for any type of Kasai. The cool thing about this list is that we can splash these hatchets in, and it opens up some avenue of maybe making just a really awful matchup into something that's a little less so, but it still doesn't feel super great. That being said, Yasha here won the entire event by defeating a Dromai, which is super duper cool, very, very cool, and kind of showing why this version of the list exists in its current iteration, its current format. By the way, also we're splashing Oasis and 2 AB, and I think that is exactly correct. That's exactly what you do from the Kasai side into Kano, and you just try to put down damage on them. You try to give that damage. You have to go fast. You have to kind of go breakneck, and you have to keep maybe like an Oasis, find an Oasis early, keep it floating around, and then keep your AB2 kind of churning. But it's a hard matchup as well, which is why Kasai feels really dangerous if you're expecting any number of Kano and a lot of Dromai in the Pro Tour. But we could see some Kasai players show up with maybe this hatchet build, thinking that they want to try and take a couple of percentage points off of that Dromai matchup, and maybe just kind of splash the other ones, because honestly, she feels quite good into the field if you're not looking at those two exact matchups. I mentioned it last week, we're gonna have to talk about this Betsy win. Betsy is a hero that has not been popular or highly played, both in Limited and also in Classic Constructed, because there are just Guardians that, quote unquote, do it better. But this is a cool version of the list. This is Yuma Hamazato's list from the Japan Road to Nationals. I don't know what store it was located at. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, Card Shop Llanowar, which is kind of fun. Llanowar Elves reference there. Nevertheless, this is a really fun list that has a couple of cards like you almost never see played, which is very cool. First of all, I want to point this out. The only chest piece in the list is Tunic, and this is definitely the Tunic type build where you play every couple of turns one of these great 4-for-8s basically by pitching a single blue, and you send very efficient attacks. So we're running all the buckling blows, all the debilitates in both red and blue. We're running Mangle as well, which is one card that people do cut fairly regularly in this type of build if you're trying to play more defensively. 2 Enlightened Strikes, most likely in the sideboard, so that you can splash them in and try to deal with maybe like auras if you're facing down Prism, but that's probably just a terrible matchup if you are. Command and Conquer, which feels pretty solid across the entirety of Flesh and Blood. Like, this card is just what you play nowadays. And then of course Bet Big is the old splash, the last of the 4s. The 4 attacks, and you're not necessarily using this for Betsy's effect, where you can of course pay, that's not her, there she is. You can of course pay 2 and give it +1 and overpower, but really what we're doing is we're just using this as an efficient 4-for-8 attack. But that's not the spicy part. The spicy part of this list isn't even money where your mouth is, because that's kind of what you would expect to see in a Betsy list based on her hero power. But the spicy stuff is Withstand, and technically Nerves of Steel, but also just this being a very defensive build, because you don't see this card played a lot. But if we're playing Titan's Fist as our primary weapon and Rampart of the Ram's Head as our offhand for every single matchup ever except for Kano, in which case we're Arcane Lantern. If you're doing that, then Rampart costs 1 to block with, and it blocks for 1. And then you can, if you're pitching a blue, you have 2 floating, you can, before you actually block, you can pay 2 of that blue to play Withstand, and this would make your shield block for 7. In a meta that has a lot of KO, pushing a lot of damage, and a lot of other Guardians pushing big attacks, Withstand actually makes some amount of sense. And if you don't face down a matchup where you plan on using this, you just sideboard it out for something like Sink Below, but you can also just splash Sink Below in, because that card's really good. And then we have an almost perfect rainbow of staunch responses. So again, we're playing off of this 1 for shield, 2 for staunch response. We are basically cosplaying Oldhim here, which I think is super fun. And then a nice blue suite of cards you would generally expect. Ripple Away is starting to see more play, which is kind of fun because it's pretty decent into Dromai, and it's pretty decent into KO as well, as they make more tokens. You can instant speed discard this, Ripple Away some of those tokens. Taking away the agility token is quite good if you're up against a KO playing Cast Bones. And then this is something you don't normally see is Thump. Thump is another one of those efficient 4 attacks. This one's only attacking for 4, but the cool thing about this is if you combine it with a couple of these other tools, like for example, Money Where Your Mouth Is, in the late game scenario, this actually gets a lot better because it's getting the buff, it's getting Dominate, it's getting on hit discard a card, and you can do this off of 2 blues like you could before, but it gets a little bit better than that too because you can actually Good Time Chapeau, give it a wager. This is like jumping through hoops. Give it a wager effect, and then give it +1 to give it Dominate and Overpower. They don't actually they don't work like stack on top of each other. They just like Dominate supersedes Overpower, but it's still pretty funny that it functions like that. Thump, MVP, like there it is, boom, right there, boom. Tear Asunder is natural and just really good. Imposing Vistage is pretty decent. Stamp Authority and the Nerves of Steel being the things that you can go and fetch from Imposing Visage. You don't see Nerves of Steel played much. The first effect on Nerves of Steel is like almost never getting used because it takes a -1 block counter from a chest equipment you control, and if you block with Tunic, it goes away, so that's kind of the pointless side of things. But Battle Worn and Temper on equipment you control doesn't trigger if it defends an attack with 2 or less base attack, or just attack in general, which means if you're playing against a bunch of ninjas in your meta, this card makes a ton of sense. Same thing with Stamp Authority. You're playing against a bunch of on-hit effects, this card makes a ton of sense. So super huge shout out to, what was it, Yuma? I think it was Yuma, if I remember correctly. Super huge shout out to Yuma for picking up the win on Betsy, being the first person to do it if memory serves correct. That is pretty cool. I am super pumped for that, and I hope that she gets a little bit more love going forward, maybe in the form of cards being printed, but also just people playing her out there and doing her best. And finally, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. I don't know if it's the elephant in the room. Ethan Van Sant went over to the AGE Open in March here, played in that, also is getting prepped and ready to go for casting, or providing coverage for, is the best way to say it, for the Pro Tour that's coming up on Thursday. And he went a little early over into the LA side of things, jumped into the AGE Open and just won the whole freaking thing. So kudos to him. I am actually not going to break his list down though, because this thing is, I mean, it's like a masterpiece. I went and saw Dune 2 today, and there are moments of that that are just really thick with like theme and subtext and like storytelling. This deck list is the Dune Part 2 of deck lists. It runs 1 Command and Conquer, 1 red and yellow Graveling Growl, a single Guardian of the Shadow Realm, which I watched him play in a game like 2 weekends ago for his RTN stream. The 1 Args. I mean, it's like, it's got like things and in denominations you would never expect to see. He runs Doomsday. Like, does anyone do that anymore? Like, this is like such a perfect looking list that I'm just going to let him do his own thing on this, because there's something almost arguably better to talk about, and that's Talon's top 5. I think it was top 5 list. Maybe you lost in the quarters. I'm sorry, Talon, if I forget. But I have heard on several occasions that he is constantly lurking at the AGE Open towards those top tables. And this is the first time I've seen in a while, perhaps, or ever, I don't know, his Riptide list make the cut into the top 8. And we have to talk about Riptide in the top 8 because there's a lot of people that just go, Riptide just sucks. Why would you play certain heroes in the game? It makes no sense. And without going any further than that, they write off heroes. Now, there's a problem with that. And the problem is that in this particular meta, minus a few just unwinnable or very bad matchups, Riptide actually has some game, some serious game. And that's into Brutes and Guardians and Warriors, especially Warriors. Like, he has lots of game into a lot of different things. So let's talk about this list because it's worth it. It's worth it. It's a Dreadbore list. If you don't know what Dreadbore does, there it is. Read it for yourself. +1 to your attack that comes out of the arsenal, your arrow. and they can't play defense reactions from their hand, which is quite good as well. And that's just a static effect. Keep that in mind. You don't have to actually load the arrow for you to get that static no defense reaction from hand effect. Now, looking at the list, this is not what you normally see for Riptide lists. If you've like looked at any Riptide lists, congratulations, you're awesome. That's number one. And number two, you see a lot of like bolt-in shots and trying to like get just like zero cost damage, big like pumps. Your laces. It plays almost like Azalea does right now without the dominate effect on a stick and essentially with more traps and things like that. But that's not this list. This list is far and away different. We'll put it that way. This only runs 2 red bolt-in shots. It does run like Command and Conquer, E-Strikes, Endless Arrows. A full suite, I would say, of the standard traps, your inertia traps, frailty traps. It runs Take Cover, which is something that some people play, some people don't. It does run Boulder Trap, which again is something some people play and some people don't, but I think is catching on. Pendulum Trap is the really spicy one. That art, I remember editing that art and thinking to myself, I can't believe this exists on a card. But also, it's a kind of a weird card. The weird splashy things are what we need to talk about, and kind of how this deck is really built and how it's built to function based on what I'm reading here. So, the deck is very much aligned towards fatigue, and not in the way you would normally think where you just block. In like the Guardian-esque, I'm going to play efficiently and fatigue you by damage, and then in doing so, like constantly leaking damage over you and then punishing you at the end of it all with either you running out of like consistency cards like threats and things like that and switching over to like a weapon-based game plan, or just killing you off of the back of trap damage. How do we know this? Well, we're taking a look through the list and we have an efficient card here. It is a 1 card, or really technically a 2 card 7, or you can actually get go again from it. But outside of that card and 2 Ravenous Rabbles and maybe a Bolt-in Shot, because there's only 2 of them and they get the static buff and therefore the go again from the Dreadbore, and maybe these 2 give and takes, and maybe this Sikkim Shot, everything else is really not geared around go again. It's not geared around firing multiple arrows a turn. What we're actually doing is just playing efficient attacks. Command and Conquer is just efficient. Headshot. Headshot is, in this list, is going to be loaded face up with Dreadbore, and so it's getting +2 from its effect and +1 from Dreadbore. This is a 1 for 7 arrow. It's just like, well, technically it's a 2 for 7 arrow because you have to pay 1 to load it, 1 to fire it, right? So 2 for 7. Okay. Premeditate is a 0 for 3 and arsenal a card. Remorseless is a 2 for 5, or technically a 2 for 6 whenever you get it in with the actual effect from Dreadbore. Sikkim Shot is an interesting one because it's a 2 for 5 as well that just has guaranteed go again and opens up Codex of Frailty turns. But our entire game plan here, I should talk about Sedation Shot. Yellow Sedation freaking Shot. It creates an inertia token. It's going to leak damage unless they give you 2 cards. You're pitching a card, putting this in, playing this card, and it cannot be cleanly blocked by Sink Below from hand because it can't be played, and it cannot be cleanly blocked by any 0 for 4 defense reaction because it's coming for 5. Because remember, when you load it and fire it with Dreadbore, it's a 2 for 5, and that's why this list is so cool, because it can like efficiently block with these traps and with these defense reactions that it plays, and then it can send damage that is almost guaranteed to leak unless they give you equipment or they give you multiple cards. And if that's the like back and forth game plan, then you get them to a low enough life total where they just start to either fatigue or you start to kill them with these traps. That's super cool. Now, if I'm way off base, sue me. Tell me if in a comment below. But this is a very cool, like, kind of alternate version of a Riptide list that I haven't seen floating around too terribly much. Also, I have to say, Codex of Frailty and this splash Virulent Touch into the decks that want to block you feels pretty cool. That's pretty spicy. I like that. Virulent Touch, fetch it with Codex of Frailty and just send that. I like that. I'm a fan. I'm a big fan. So this is a pretty awesome list, and I'm sad it didn't win so that we couldn't talk about it even more, but congrats to Talon for picking this up. So let me know what you think about all of these lists in a comment below, and if you really like this channel and you want to support it, then the time has come to make the number right there go to the other number. Numbers going to the other numbers is like what we do on this channel. So, I mean, if you're new here, you join the club. Join the club and make numbers go slightly higher, because people that do that are part of the club. And you can be part of the club too. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.